And the same is true, even Anderson, in terms of the issue that we struggle with over the Palestinian thing. How can you be part of a coalition of conscience and not be concerned about any occupation? It could be Kashmir, it could be Gaza or the West Bank. How are you going to be a coalition of conscience in a morally consistent way and not be critical of your Jewish brothers and sisters, some of whom are in solidarity with the Palestinians and some of whom are tied to a Trump-like figure, Brother Netanyahu himself? Now, how are you going to be against Trump here and tight with a Trump-like figure there? How do you do that in such a way that you never, ever allow for any kind of anti-Jewish hatred, anti-Jewish sentiment, but rather based on Jewish values? Justice shall you pursue. That's what Rabbi Heschel taught us. That's what the best of the great Jewish prophets have taught us. That's also part of a coalition of conscience. And that's going to be a challenge to Biden and Harris, because at the moment they tend to be so tied to the deeply conservative lobbies that don't want to take seriously the humanity of Palestinian brothers and sisters.
I got to end here, but we mentioned at the top of the program that as Democrats were celebrating the diversity of their party and the historic nomination of Kamala Harris, Donald Trump was calling her nasty. He also tweeted this, quote, "The suburban housewife will be voting for me. They want safety, and are thrilled that I ended the long-running program where low-income housing would invade their neighborhood. Biden would reinstall it in a bigger form with Cory Booker in charge." He then tagged Fox and Friends and Fox business anchor Maria Bartiromo. Joe Biden touched on the theme of race and justice during his speech today, mentioning that the event today took place exactly 3 years after a deadly far-right rally in Charlottesville that shook the nation.
Remember what it felt like to see those neo-Nazis, close your eyes, and those Klansmen, white supremacists, coming out of fields, carrying lighted torches, faces contorted, bulging, veins, pouring into the streets of historic American city, spewing the same anti-Semitic bile we heard in Hitler's Germany in the 30s. At that moment, I knew I couldn't stand by and let Donald Trump, a man who went on to say, when asked about what he thought, he said there were very fine people on both sides. Quote, very fine people on both sides. No president of the United States of America has ever said anything like that.
Well, my next guest was in Charlottesville 3 years ago. Joining me now is Dr. Cornel West, professor of philosophy at Harvard Divinity School and professor emeritus at Princeton University. Dr. West, great to see you. I want to ask you about the event today with Biden and Kamala Harris, but I just got to talk to you about this tweet. I mean, Trump talking about the suburban housewife, an invasion of low-income housing orchestrated by a black man, Cory Booker. I mean, that's not even a dog whistle. That's just blatant.
Oh, yeah. I mean, Brother Trump is just being the gangster that he always is, but he's desperate. He's not used to losing. He's been winning all his life by means of impunity, no accountability, cold-heartedness, and mean-spiritedness. And I think for the first time now with Biden and Sister Harris, that you actually have a team that might be able to win. And I hope we can push them across the winner's line, because American democracy is about to go under. The empire is in deep decay. And I salute Brother Biden for his choice, really, because I think it's probably the only way he can win. You know what I mean? You got 65% of white brothers who voted for Trump and 53% of white sisters who voted for Trump within those who were voting. And so you're going to have black folk, you're going to have to have brown folk, you're going to have Asian folk, you're going to have those white folk who care, you're going to have indigenous people pushing a fascist out of the White House. And yet at the same time, though, Brother Anderson, to keep in mind the real criteria of what was going on today was set by Curtis Mayfield with that song, Move On Up. And he was talking about a people moving up from slavery, up from Jim Crow, up from Jane Crow, up from lynching, up from the dilapidated housing, up from the massive unemployment, up from no access to health care, and so forth. And then you had our dear sister Kamala, who got that special AKA stamp of brilliance, eloquence, charisma. In fact, much more than even Brother Biden. I think he understands that, but they're going to work that out, I guess, in their own way. But the fundamental question is, you see, Curtis Mayfield was talking about move on up from the vantage point of the black masses, not just the black middle classes, the black masses. So he wants to know, are they going to just allow for blackface in a high place once again, or are they going to be able to deliver wrestling with poverty, wrestling with Pentagon militarism, wrestling with Wall Street greed, wrestling with escalating wage stagnation and so forth? Those are the deep questions of Martin King, of Ella Baker, of Fannie Lou Hamer. That's the real challenge of our dear sister Kamala.
Well, you've been critical of Harris in the past. I know at one point I think you called her a centrist candidate who acts progressive. Do you think those who've criticized her prosecutorial record, or maybe her record as Attorney General, will be able to see past it? I mean, obviously, right now the choices are Biden, Harris, or Trump, Pence.
Right. I think right now we've got to be part of an anti-fascist coalition of conscience. You see our dear sister use Martin Luther King Jr.'s language, coalition of conscience. We've got to make sure Trump leaves the White House one way or another, either by election, or if he loses and he won't leave, then some of us will have to just go and escort the brother. You know what I mean? It's time to go. You've done your damage. But we can't be under any illusions. When Biden and Harris get in there, if they still tied to Wall Street, still tied to the militarism, Africa, if they still tied to not dealing with quality public education, if they're still tied to their same old neoliberal elites, then we're just going to have another slow disaster rather than a quick catastrophe. With Trump, you got a quick catastrophe. He's got to go. That's why I myself, even as a radical, and I just want Trump people to know, I'm a radical. My dear sister Harris is not a radical. She is she's a centrist and a moderate. I love the sister. She's my AKA sister and everything. But at the same time, I recognize that when it comes to the serious class struggles that are going on, the class war of the bosses against workers, she hasn't always been on the side of the workers. Neither has Biden. Well,
it's interesting because
Biden linked to the major mass incarceration regime in the modern world. He helped create that. You know what I mean? So that we have to tell the truth about even those we vote for. That's why I don't endorse them. I vote for them because I try to stay true to Curtis Mayfield's music. When he's talking about moving on up, he's talking about integrity, honesty, decency. He's talking about vision. He's talking about courage. He's talking about generosity. He's not just talking about winning the next election. And see, it's in our musicians and our artists that they set the standards. And when they play Curtis, I said, ooh, they messing with a genius from Chicago now. They messing with the great black musical tradition now. So this is not a plaything. And yet I do think at this moment we've got to push for those too, even though I love my Green Party folk and I love my movement for People's Party that we're going to be wrestling with Nick, because in the end, I don't think the Democratic Party is going to be strong enough as an institution to really follow through on the kind of things that William Barber and the others are talking about in terms of fighting poverty and keeping alive the legacy of Martin King, Fannie Lou Hamer.
It is. I mean, there was something about seeing her speak today when you think about the history of the Democratic Party and how the Democratic Party has depended on Black Americans as its backbone. Maybe taken for granted, and particularly Black women. And I think for, who have not gotten their due in the civil rights movement and today.
Absolutely. In fact, the Black freedom movement has been the leaven in the American democratic loaf. The loaf could not expand without the Black freedom movement, because our freedom fighters have always said, we fight first for those on the chocolate side of town, and then it spills over. Just like Curtis Mayfield's music, it spills over and touches the soul of everybody. Democratic Party did that from the 30s thereafter. Black folk did that for the Republican Party after Lincoln. So in that regard, the best of the American tradition has been in the best of the Black freedom struggle, and yet we can't settle just for symbol. The symbolic blow against white supremacy, the symbolic blow against male supremacy, magnificent. Let's see the substance. By your fruits, you shall know them. So after we push Trump out, then we're going to have to put such tremendous pressure on Biden, tremendous pressure on Sister Harris, because they're going to fall right back into their centrist ways again. friendly with Wall Street, letting them get away with their greed, the militarism with the military budgets that they themselves have voted for over and over again. They have voted for Trump's military budgets. You say, wait a minute, where's the coalition of conscience here? You know what I mean? And the same is true, even Anderson, in terms of the issue that we struggle with over the Palestinian thing. How can you be part of a coalition of conscience and not be concerned about any occupation? It could be Kashmir, it could be Gaza or the West Bank. How are you going to be a coalition of conscience in a morally consistent way and not be critical of your Jewish brothers and sisters, some of whom are in solidarity with the Palestinians and some of whom are tied to a Trump-like figure, Brother Netanyahu himself? Now, how are you going to be against Trump here and tight with a Trump-like figure there? How do you do that in such a way that you never, ever allow for any kind of anti-Jewish hatred, anti-Jewish sentiment, but rather based on Jewish values? Justice shall you pursue. That's what Rabbi Heschel taught us. That's what the best of the great Jewish prophets have taught us. That's also part of a coalition of conscience. And that's going to be a challenge to Biden and Harris, because at the moment they tend to be so tied to deeply conservative lobbies that don't want to take seriously the humanity of Palestinian brothers and sisters.
I got to end here, but before we go, you mentioned Curtis Mayfield. I'm a big Nina Simone fan. If you had to pick a Nina Simone song,
too. Oh, Mississippi got. No, we won't say it on television. We'll say it on television. But it comes from
I've been
the same
listening
love.
to Obeda Woman. I don't know if you know the song Obeda Woman that she sings, and it's a live performance, and it's incredible.
I'm going to listen to that tonight with my daughter, though. But how's Brother Wyatt doing? He's holding on all right?
He's doing well. He's listening to Nina Simone with me, so he's doing well. We're trying to teach him early, you know? Cornel West, always a pleasure. Thank you.
Indeed. Love you much, brother.
Right.
Stay strong.
You take care. Ahead.